Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a well-respected author and the national spokesperson for the BJP, Mr. Tuhin Sinha. Tuhinji, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashutosh. It's an absolute pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. Tuhin Sinha is the author and national spokesperson of the BJP. He's an author of a trilogy, The Legend of Birsa Munda, The Great Tribal Warriors of Bharat, and Sido Kanhu. His latest book is Modi's Northeast Story, which is an anthology comprising 23 essays that document the transformation of our northeastern states under Prime Minister Modi. So, Tuhinji, let me start by asking you, tell me a little bit about your own journey and experiences that led you to politics and becoming the national spokesperson.
Well, Ashutosh, it's been a journey full of, experimenting with different avenues in life. I grew up in a place called Jamshedpur. My dad used to be an engineer with Tata Motors. So, an industrial, a very compact industrial town has its own opportunities, has its own challenges and its own limitations also.
Right.
So I think, in my growing up years, I would see all my schoolmates, or most of my schoolmates, preparing to become engineers, doctors, and chartered accountants. And I was this maverick who wanted to do something different, who was very starry-eyed. Having said that, both writing came naturally to me, and politics interested me from a very young age. I believe, when a kid first starts reading newspapers, which is around 12 or 13 years of age, or, when he starts assimilating news unfolding in different parts of the world, I think that's the time when he begins to form a worldview on important political matters. And that was the time, 1990, it was around that time when I started, reading newspapers diligently and soaking in current affairs. And that was the time when India was kind of fatigued with the existing ruling party. India was experiencing a certain monotony. India wanted to explore a viable alternative, which somewhere, was distantly visible, but was nowhere close to forming a government of its own. Right. So I think at a very young age, my political ideology was clear. But of course, it's been a very circuitous, it's been a very roundabout way, because, I went on to pursue my professional career. I was a marketing person for a year. I quit that to explore career in the entertainment industry in Mumbai. And around that time, in the early 2000s, the Indian publishing industry was opening up. I wrote a book which went on to become an instant bestseller. Of course, when I look back to it, I believe, I think that story was just something which was very pertinent to that age or that phase of my life. But yes, I mean, and when it comes to politics, I've been very active, from around 2011 onwards. So that broadly sums up my journey.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this. So we're going to speak basically of two topics today. One is you as a national spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party, and second is your books. So let's first speak about your first avatar as the national spokesperson of the BJP. And my first question is, what are some of the key responsibilities you handle as a national spokesperson?
Well, it's a wide set of responsibilities. We are responsible for, representing the party on the national media. The slots are decided by the party. At the same time, while our social media presence is not entirely representative of our official role, that pretty much also represents our thought process and the party's thought process. And plus, obviously, with the new age media coming in, podcasts, both for well-known television channels as well as for individuals, that also becomes an extension of our communication for the party. So I believe, rooting one, BJP is a very interesting party. Number one, it is the only party which is ideologically rooted, because, the other people have come out to be crass opportunists in this era. So one, I think, expanding on the ideological identity of the party. especially for the younger generation who are not aware of the political journey of BJP for the last 44 years and prior to that of the Jansan. But number two, most importantly, is also to, kind of expand on the communication with regard to Viksit Bharat, because Prime Minister Modi ji has given some very clear, very concerted goals insofar as the economy is concerned, and the mushrooming sectors from here are concerned, whether it is defense or energy. So I think it's a pretty much it's a comprehensive role which encompasses the development narrative plus obviously the ideological narrative.
Amazing, thank you. And I couldn't agree with you more. I've been associated with the RSS for over 50 years.
Oh, wonderful.
So I completely agree.
And to quickly add to it, when you have unfortunate developments like the one which has, taken place in Bangladesh, which was to a large extent manufactured due to a concerted propaganda by vested interests within the country, I think that also makes us cognizant of the need to guard against such balkanization forces within the country.
Very well said.
And I think, that also becomes an important role for a BJP spokesperson today to highlight the dangers from the Tukre gangs, from those people who are obsessed with caste census without having a history that backs it.
Very well said. Well said. But, you said you came into politics in 2011 and Prime Minister Modi won in 2014. I wanted to get your perspective and how has the political landscape evolved in our country during your tenure as a national spokesperson?
Well, pre-2014, I think India was pretty much in a messy zone. Pre-2014, we never had a prime minister who would think or talk for the next 25 years. So that's one key change. We have very clearly defined goals as a nation for the next 23, 24 years, because, when we stand at roughly $4 trillion economy and aspire to become a $40 trillion plus economy in the next 23 years from now, obviously the sectoral goals need to be very well defined. And I think that's something which Prime Minister Modi's visionary leadership has given to the country.
Right.
Because unfortunately, pre-2014, most of the leaders would be obsessed for the immediate, next couple of years, how they would manage to survive in politics and how they would manage to prolong the existence. The visionary leadership for the next 20 years was never there. I think that's one very big difference. And, besides, of course, like I said, pre-2014, the whole definition of being in politics used to more or less, whether covertly or overtly revolve around self-aggrandizement. Today, that is not, so if someone makes a call to me with a request to call up a college, for a recommendation for his kids' admission, I think the first thing I tell him is that, unfortunately, that's not my mandate, neither my role. But pre-2014, that used to be commonplace. Politicians used to be, these siparish karne wale log and...
Well said.
So I think that's one big difference.
Well said. The other question, Tuhin, that I wanted to know was, and I've often been asked this by people who watch that TV debates, is how do you as a spokesperson, number one, come so well prepared, but on the other side, how do you handle so much misinformation and fake news?
Number one, I think, you need to be ideologically rooted. So from 1990 onwards, from the time that I joined or, my first assimilation of political information and knowledge began, I think I have stuck to one ideology. Unlike many other politicians who treat it as a 9-to-5 job and who have been in multiple parties before joining the BJP. Let me be very candid about it. So, the difference in ideological clarity between someone who has been rooted in the ideology for a good 3.5 decades and between someone who has been a turncoat would show.
Correct.
The other important part is that, I think it's a very interesting time for the entire world. The demography war is a global phenomenon. Somewhere, unless we start talking about it, the UK is at war with, the migrants storming large parts of central, Europe, and London is impacted.
Correct.
Now, unfortunately, there are certain politicians, there is a growing communist Islamist nexus the world over. And politicians like Jeremy Corbyn, while they may be the mascot of this toxic communist Islamist politics in UK, unfortunately, in India, you have the likes of Rahul Gandhi, Mamta Banerjee, Hemant Soren doing the same. So I think, there is a larger civilizational war at play, and we can't be dismissive of it for too long. So when you treat it, when you stop thinking about the immediate issues, or maybe you look at the larger picture and you have a clarity on the larger picture, it's a nation which needs to be protected from the demographic distortion which is being planned, by different political parties. I think that gives a lot of gravitas, that gives a lot of clarity when I represent the party on television.
Well said. And when you come in as a spokesperson, whether it's on television or other media, what strategies do you use to communicate the BJP's policies and standpoints effectively?
Well, today what I've done is that my writing essentially in the last 4 or 5 years has been an extension of my political views and ideological views. So if you look at my last 5 books, 3 of them were around tribal warriors, unsung tribal warriors. So and that was also a theme which Prime Minister Modi ji was championing at the national level.
Correct.
In fact, last 15th August, I traveled to the village of Birsa Munda, met his descendants, and tried to explain them the entire issue of forced conversion and predatory proselytization, which was a very big issue 150 years ago and continues to be a bigger menace today. So I think what I have done is and post the Tribal Warriors trilogy, I worked on a book on the Northeast because, unfortunately, while in the last 16 months or so, Manipur has flared up, and unfortunately, much of the good work that was done in Manipur between 2017 and 23, has been undone. Fact is, the kind of transformation which our northeastern states has witnessed in the last 10 years has been unprecedented. Imagine, nearly 4.5 lakh crores worth of capital expenditure going into those 8 states. Imagine the total number of airports going up from 8 to 17. So places which you would take a good 36 hours to reach from Guwahati, especially on the easternmost border of Arunachal, can be traversed within 6 to 8 hours today.
Correct.
So again, post Tribal Warriors trilogy, I worked on another theme, which is the Northeastern theme, which is very close to Prime Minister Modi. And currently, just to share this, I have not shared this anywhere before, I'm presently working on a book which documents India's climate action initiatives in the last 10 years.
Amazing.
So I think what I have done is that I've very clearly merged my writing objectives with my larger ideological and political objectives. And this, I think, unanimity serves me well.
Amazing. And that response gives me a good segue to your books now. And you partly answered the question, but my question is, how do you think your books contribute to the historical and cultural discourse in our country?
Well, we have an opposition leader who enjoys vilifying a Savarkar, who likes to believe that India's freedom movement is the fiefdom of one ideology and one political party. So with my books, especially the Tribal Warriors trilogy, I have tried to challenge and successfully decimate the fake narrative trying to be built up by this opposition leader. India's freedom movement did not start in 1885 with the formation of the Congress Party or with the formation of the Indian National Congress. It predates the formation of the Indian National Congress by a good 102 years, because the first well-documented story of a tribal warrior goes back to 1783 in the area of present-day Bhagalpur, and the warrior was Tilka Majhi, somebody from the tribal community who the opposition has not given any worth in the last 7 decades. Right. So my point is that someone who consciously vilifies a Savarkar would do the same to tribal warriors and to all the unsung heroes of the country if you don't, stand up for them, if you don't document their stories. And Indian freedom movement, mind you, were 2 parallel movements. One which was being documented, which was being, run by the elite, or the well-educated, let me put it that way, by the well-educated, erudite, freedom fighters. But the other one, which was going on in villages, in tribal hamlets, and the far-flung areas, was never, properly documented and never got its due till a few years back. So I think that's my contribution to this entire theme. And like I said, the freedom movement in tribal areas and far-flung villages used to be far more complex and far more challenging than the mainstream freedom movement, which has been reported. There were issues of, economic harassment through zamindars, which in many cases act as agents for Britishers. There was the issue of predatory proselytization starting around 1850. So that made, the subaltern freedom movement 10 times more challenging than the freedom movement which we have grown up reading.
Very interesting. And coming to your latest book, Modi's Northeast Story, what inspired you to compile the 23 essays?
Well, Northeast has always been an enigma. People living in 20 other states of the country seem to know so little about the beautiful northeastern states. And unfortunately, even in terms of their ability to contribute to our GDP, much of it remained untapped because of a very cavalier or a very very unfair attitude of the Congress Party. So in 1962, we are all aware of how Nehru had virtually abandoned the Northeast with a commentary that, my heart goes out to the people of when Bomdila was taken over by the Chinese. In 1984, they were writing across Assam, the Nelai massacre, which had led to the death of about 1,700 people. Unfortunately, while Prime Minister Vajpayee had done his bit, had invested heavily in infrastructure creation in the Northeast. Somehow, the people from the Northeast had never grown out of the scars of these two incidents of 1962 and 1984. And somewhere they felt alienated. I think that alienation has been dispensed almost 90% in the last 10 years. There has been a reach out. I spent a lot of time in Delhi when I was in college, in the late 90s. I would so callously hear people refer to them with a racial slur, which I don't hear anymore. Right. That's because of the mainstreaming which has happened both culturally and the creation of infrastructure has only bridged that cultural gap which had existed for a very long time. So I think the story needed to be documented. It's a template which can be replicated for any other part of the world.
Very well said. And I also want to talk to you about your trilogy. What are some of the lesser known facts about the freedom fighters that are featured in your trilogy?
See, like I mentioned, they fought a far more complex battle than the mainstream bodies because they were short on resources. So one interesting thing which I would like to point out here is that Birsa Munda had organized a private army around 1898, 1899 in three districts which fall into present-day Jharkhand. Obviously in those days it was part of the erstwhile Bengal province. Now he did that with such tact and with such precision that the Britishers, despite him being on the radar, never got to know of it. And eventually launched a massive attack on the eve of Christmas in 1899, which virtually shook the British Empire in the entire region. Now, the surprising part is that 4 decades later, Subhash Chandra Bose, who was born merely 200 kilometers away from the birthplace of Birsa Munda, replicated the formation of a similar private army on an international scale. So it is not entirely, impossible that somewhere these tribal freedom fighters, because, hearsay would be the medium in those days for people to know about these movements, because unfortunately, the story of these freedom fighters were not documented while they were alive, because history has always been written from the point of view of kings. They were documented much after the death. But somewhere, hearsay may have contributed to Subhash Chandra Bose knowing about the greatness of this man. And I think, there is a lot of similarity between what he did post-1940, leading to the Indian National Army formation spread across different countries, and what Birsa Munda did in those 3 districts with tribals and with uneducated, resourceless people. So I think that's the beauty of these unknown stories, unsung warriors.
I wasn't aware of this, but I'm going to get hold of your book and read it. Thank you for sharing this. So I have time for two more questions for you. My next question is, how do you think as an author, literature can impact political thought and action?
Well, it's both ways. I think political willpower is what brings about positive changes in a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So yesterday, that was 5th of August, will be a very important day in our civilizational discourse because number one, the Article 370, which had led to the ghettoization of Kashmir by a selected few, was dispensed completely. Mm. And number two, the Shilanyas of the Ram Mandir had taken place on 5th August 2020. Mm. Now, when we were growing up, we had begun to believe that most of these disputes can never be solved in our lifetime. In fact, that is what that is the perception that, the Congress era politicians had created, that these are problems you have to live with for most part of your life. Mm-hmm. Pakistan was staring at us, would be staring at us like this behemoth, who we remain clueless about how to handle. And where is Pakistan today? Pakistan stands decimated. So I think political willpower is the most important thing in a democracy, which can impact people's lives and which can impact the future discourse of a nation. Mm. Now, literature needs to support this political willpower, right, while also, creating a scope for a future discourse. For example, a lot of literature had been floating around in the last couple of years over the unfair powers given to Waqf Board. Finally, action is taking place. Mm. So a small, just a trivia, if I may add over here, because I have enjoyed writing on different subjects, one of my books, even though it was a fiction story, adapted or inspired from real life characters, with a Kashmir backdrop, called When the Chief Fell in Love, with the tagline Kashmiriyat, Jamhuriyat, Insaniyat, leading to Hindustaniyat, was released in 2018. Wow. Mm-hmm. That was 2 years prior to the abrogation of 1.5 years prior to the abrogation of Article 370. And in the last chapter, it had mentioned the abrogation of Article 370 and the reorganization of the state as veritable, real solutions to the problem. So that, in fact, that may have been precocious, but that eventually happened. So that's how literature can contribute to politics and vice versa.
Amazing. Thank you. And my last question, and I can't possibly let you go without asking this because a lot of my young viewers and listeners want to know, you haven't had an opportunity to interact extensively with our Prime Minister. Can you share any memorable moments from your interactions with him?
Well, his conversations are the most personalized that a prime minister could have with a common citizen. Where I had a detailed one-to-one meeting with him in 2013 when he was the chief minister. Obviously, I've met him on different occasions post that. But I was surprised. I was amazed with the kind of research which had gone, from his side before the meeting. So he knew exactly about my background, what I might potentially talk, and he likes to invest in people. I think that makes him very different because, unless you are a good listener, unless you take interest in the person you're speaking. So those personal details, his ability to keep in touch, for example, even now, when I'm not, obviously I can't be in direct touch with him because BJP is the largest party, but he has a team which virtually updates him every second day about anything positive happening with with party officials or some interesting incident which may have taken place on a television debate. So that's the way he keeps himself in sync with what is happening in the party, and that's phenomenal. The amount of information that he personally nurtures and carries and responds to, that's absolutely phenomenal.
Very well said. And on that note, Tuhin, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. Very inspiring for a lot of young people. Thank you for speaking to me about the role of a national spokesperson of BJP. Not an easy role, but there's so much
Thank
to
you so
learn in it,
much.
and so much to do that. And thank you also for speaking to me about all your books.
Thank you
again.
so much, Ashutoshi. It was an absolute pleasure. And I really enjoyed the erudite conversation. Hats off to you for putting forth the right questions.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.